Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of the Broadcast Club. I am Ange Time.
I'm Ralana Tricolor.
And I'm Nakanashi.
This episode, we're going to talk about the translation quality of, more specifically, English translation quality of Japanese visual novels. To talk about this topic for this episode, we are bringing on John Hooper, formerly known as GundamAce, who has actually been a part of previous English translation projects.
Hi, I'm John Hooper. I began translating about 7 years ago when I started with the Never Seven fan translation into English, which we released in 2012. After that, I formed a translation group called Lemnisca Translations to translate games such as IO and Killer Queen to English. After that, we went official and we were hired to do the official English translation of Root Double Before Crime After Days Extended Edition on Steam. And currently, right now, I am working as the localization director and one of the translators on Dies Irae, which is scheduled to come out next month on Steam in English.
All right, cool. So we actually have a few questions we want to ask Mr. John Hooper here.
Certainly.
Rala, did you have any? You said you had a few you wanted to ask him?
I think the big thing, at least I've been curious about for someone who started on the fan translation side of things and went official, is this has kind of become more of a common process. And again, we'll get, I think, into this a little bit later in the episode, but I was just curious to hear what your thoughts are on what the process has been like of getting into translation, going through the process, and then making that transition into the official scene.
Oh, well, how I got into the process is, it's a bit of a long story, but I guess I'll get started. So it all began when, around late 2009, I read the English version of Ever 17. I became a fan of it after that, and I joined the fan base. And as I got to talking about them, I learned about more games in that series, and I became interested in reading them. Then, a few months later, I got my hands on Never Seven, which at the time was the only Infinity Series game that did not have an English project. And I, after reading it, I decided that I wanted to share my experiences with other players in English so I could actually talk about it. And also to complete the Infinity Series in English since, it wasn't done yet. And so with the help of my team members I assembled over the process, I managed to do that. And so after I finished Never Seven, I wanted to do it, continue projects with a more organized team. There were a few projects I had lined up that I wanted to do, such as IO. And so I formed Lemnisca Translations with the key members of the Never Seven translation team in order to translate visual novels like that. Then, in 2015, we were hired in order to do the Root Double English translation. Reasons for this is that the projects we had translated up until that point were mostly projects of the director Takumi Nakazawa, who works for Regista. And Root Double was a game that I'm very interested in translating for a long time. So, and at the time, I think the main thing at the time was that instead of doing a fan translation, there was a updated version of the game on the PS3 only, which fixed several common fan complaints with the original version. But since it was on a PS3 only, there was no way we could program any of that, so we were stumped for a while on what to do. So when the opportunity came to do it officially, we jumped on board.
Yeah, something like the situation with Root Double, with how the original version had some issues that some people have with it. It seems like the kind of thing that you could really only deliver the quote unquote best version of it as an official project. So you were really really fortunate in a way.
We really wanted to give fans that best version, so it was a really good opportunity. We wanted to do it, and there. After that, I directed the localization of Root Double while also working as one of the translators. And a little later down the line, I actually was hired by Regista for about a year as a translator. And in that process, I became the localization director and one of the translators on Dies Irae. Was there a more specific answer you're looking for in terms of this?
No, that was great.
Yeah.
I've kind of got the hobbyist perspective on it. So I've I know a very small amount of Japanese and sort of tried doing a little bit of untranslated reading, so was kind of curious to see like how does that process go from being I'm interested in reading visual novels to I'm interested in reading visual novels in Japanese to I'm interested in giving these experiences to other players who can't read visual novels in Japanese. So that was
I didn't originally start wanting to become a translator when they started learning Japanese. At first, I started learning Japanese when I was about 12 because I just simply wanted to read it. That's all there was to it. And
makes sense.
I've been studying it for a few years. When I finished Ever 17, at the time on the Ever 17 board I frequented, they had actually uploaded drama CDs, which were untranslated at the time, and no one was really stepping up to the plate to translate them. I kind of thought, well, hey, I've got a few years of Japanese under my belt. Might as well give it a shot. And so I started there, and during the process, I found that I actually really liked translating. And I felt like it might be something I could possibly do professionally. This was happening right around the time I was applying for colleges, so it allowed me to realize I wanted to become a translator and thus focus on actual Japanese colleges. So I went to college from the start knowing I wanted to be a translator, which helped me out greatly during actual studying and all that.
Oh yeah, bet that helps a lot.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I literally started Never 17 translation about a week before I actually entered college, so that was also helpful.
Well, I mean, I haven't read Root Double yet, but I'm waiting for the Vita version. But I have read Never 7 and Input Output IO, and I mean, as someone who really liked Ever 17 and Remember 11, while I didn't like Never 7 and Input Output as much as those, I really appreciate that you and your group went out of your way to translate like these two visual novels, and I know they're not as popular as the others, but I still enjoyed reading them. They're good visual novels. So
thank you. As long as you enjoy it, that's all that matters.
Yep.
I think it's one of the cool things about the community, honestly, is that there's a lot of positive feedback in terms of you get into the community, and if you like it, it's very easy to find ways to contribute. At least right now with lots of the fan translation projects, and there's kind of this there's a little sense of camaraderie there, right? Like the things you're reading, at least especially a little more recently before they started doing more of the official translations, is like if you're reading something, it means that someone else has sat down and put in the time to craft this experience so that you can actually, as someone who doesn't speak Japanese, still have that experience, which is really nice.
Yeah, no, that was the main thing I was hoping for. I read it and I enjoyed it, but there was really no one to talk to it about, so I wanted to have more people talk to it about, which is one of the main reasons why I decided to translate it. I didn't really think of it in terms of me providing an experience for them, but just that's a bad way of phrasing it.
I think that's actually pretty great too, though, because it's one of the classic things, right? You finish a work of fiction, it's like I need to talk with someone about this, right?
Yeah, except instead of right away, the wait period is several years.
Yeah.
But yeah, in the end, I'm glad that I managed to create something that people enjoyed. I didn't create it. I helped bring forth something that people enjoyed.
Mm-hmm. You helped create a version of it that could be shared with more people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for answering those questions for us, John. So let's get right into the main discussion topic, translation quality. So let's start out big. What exactly makes a good English translation of a visual novel?
Good English translation is a translation you don't actually realize is a translation when you're reading it.
Exactly that. I wrote down a big point on that because that was something that I thought was actually important. Where you shouldn't be able to notice it's a translation, right? And I think that's a key point.
Right, exactly. You're supposed to read it as if it were originally written in English itself, and not even be conscious of the fact it was a translation to begin with. No, sorry, that was in Japanese to begin with. You just read it through the whole way through, get absorbed in the writing naturally, and never have to stop saying, "Oh, this sentence was a bit awkwardly translated. This is definitely something that was translated." Basically, as a translator, if the reader ever has to stop for a moment and actually think about the translated line to see what it means, then you failed, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something I've seen a lot. People talk a lot about translation quality whenever a new translation comes out. Is it a good translation? Is it a bad translation? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I actually initially, when I was getting onto the scene, wasn't really all that concerned with the translation quality, actually. I was just interested to read this stuff, and wasn't that worried about how well it was brought to English. But as I've been reading more, I've gone through a couple different stages of it. And right now it's like, how I think about it is exactly this. Does it read well in English? Does it feel like it was written in English? Like, even though it was originally written in Japanese, does the translation feel like it was written in English? Or is it like this weird version of English that is obviously heavily influenced by Japanese?
Even the average eye can usually spot something doesn't look exactly natural in English, and that's a sign of I won't say bad per se, but it's not a great translation if you can spot something like that, I feel.
Yeah, and I think you end up with some difficulties there too, because you start to get into the more complex things where, let's say someone makes a pun or some joke that it just requires some cultural knowledge, or something where you can't just feel like, oh, I'll just translate this and sure, it reads naturally, but it's like, okay, do we translate it literally and then leave it? Do we translate it literally, add like a translator note to explain the joke, or do you, make up a new joke that fits in the new language, right? The difference between localization and just translation, right?
Well, in my case, I almost always try to go for a new joke that's in the spirit of the original somewhat, or at least gets a similar feeling across. If of course this usually jokes, so you can usually get away with being a bit more liberal in those sections because it's just just for fun, not an actual plot point or anything. It's when they actually become plot points at some points that's really rough. I never actually released it, but back when I was a fan translator, I was doing a fan translation of 12 Riven, another visual novel, and at the end there's this very, very what's called complex plot-related Japanese-English pun that you have to translate in a way that it's key to a major event also, but it doesn't work at all in English. So I had to spend many hours thinking over how to make that actually work in English without seeming too forced. Well, I don't know if it played off or not in the end because I never released that, but.
And I'm still waiting for the translation for that at the end, unfortunately. Yeah.
I think you're going to keep waiting unless that gets picked up as an official thing. It sounds kind of like since most people aren't going to know 12 Riven because
right, of course, I understand that
translation for it. It sounds kind of like the same sort of situation and that came up with another big name visual novel that I won't mention right now, just in case of spoilers, that I think everybody here knows what it is, that has an issue with something along those lines that the translators were not able to really rectify in the initial pass through.
The example you gave is a bit too long for me to note specifically what you're talking about, but.
Yeah, I think that's it's going to vary from genre to genre. For something like a mystery, you're going to have to, especially if you're translating it without knowing, if it's like episodic or something, you don't know the answer. You kind of need to, I think, be a little more literal on your first pass, just because
the worst ones are kanji puns. Those are impossible to translate in English, and you just basically have to come up with something completely new because it's never going to work in English.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the things, because I've started it in the past, in I don't know, 6 to 9 months or something. I've started kind of reading stuff in Japanese, and I finished 2-3 things now, and there's some things that I'm reading, and I think of it while I'm reading it, I don't know how they would translate this. It seems like a real challenge to do, and some of these things are things that are actually getting translated, and so I have a lot of, having read some stuff in Japanese, I have a lot of respect for translators. I mean, I did already, but I have a lot of respect for translators with how much they have to really consider what they're doing. It's not just like a simple formula or anything, which anyone who has punched some Japanese into Google Translate can tell you, because that churns out some not actual English. But yeah, I have a lot of respect for the decisions that translators have to make in order to create cohesive English experience.
You know, those are the really complex puns or like wordplay and stuff like that. It is not an uncommon experience to spend literally hours thinking over the best way to translate it. And sometimes even then you don't come up with something, you have to give up and try another day.
Yeah, and that's I think it ends up kind of being a little bit of a shame too, because it's one of those things where having that like the jokes and the wordplay and that kind of thing makes it feel like a more engaging experience, but it's also the kind of thing where if it's just like a one-off joke, people aren't necessarily going to remember that or think it's important to the plot or really like it's like you're saying earlier, like a good translation you won't notice it's a translation. So if you spend all these hours getting this joke perfect, people just say, "Oh, that was a good joke," and then keep moving. Whereas if you fuck it up, they're gonna notice immediately, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes like the joke is like just or the the Japanese wordplay is too complicated to even consider translating. So you just have to either wing it or just do something in the way that makes it represent the Japanese. This is a major spoiler, so I won't give anything away. But like I.O., there's a specific Japanese wordplay that exists for the entire visual novel that was literally impossible to translate in English without coming out obnoxious or anything. So we just came up with a rather simple solution that unfortunately didn't really translate, but it still got the point across. Sometimes you have to resort to cheaper trickery like that.
Makes sense.
Well, kind of related to jokes, this is kind of less on like the word play that we were just talking about, but I don't. For people who have read Majikoi, like at least the original, like the whole thing, I don't know if people noticed, but they got a new translator like for the Miyako and like the true route and like all the bro arc routes. And the new translator, this is kind of like a slight mild controversy, but he kind of liked to add some like meme-ish jokes like during like the funny moments, which were they kind of, I guess they to me they do kind of fit the like the feel atmosphere or the silliness of the series, but I know some people don't like it when they.
My personal feelings on that to translators, I wouldn't borrow meme jokes. They think that you think you're being clever, but you're really not. It's just going to be annoying and stick out more than it really should be. Plus, there's also the fact that if it's a meme joke, I'm generally against pop culture jokes because in a few years they're going to become dated anyway. And I prefer the translation be kept timeless, so to speak.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, of course, the Japanese version may stick with pop culture jokes or something like that, but even then, I feel that you really shouldn't try.
Well, then you're fucked because it's like, do I preserve the intent and make the pop culture joke and people rail me for inserting, meme jokes into my translation, or do you make something new and get away from the intent of the original?
I'd just go, at least in Japanese cases, if it's a Japanese pop culture reference, it's unlikely, unless it's like an anime or manga reference, that the crowd will get it anyway, so might as well do something new. Of course, if it is an anime or manga reference, I guess you should try to keep it, as long as it's popular enough.
Yeah. I remember I was reading Tokyo Babel, and they, I had, Japanese audio on, and in the Japanese they were making references to things like Blade Runner and Monty Python, which I thought was actually really funny, that the Japanese references were to Western pop culture, which means they just get to leave them in because all the people from the West would automatically get them.
Yeah, exactly.
Does anyone else have any particular points they want to bring up about like what makes a good translation?
I actually, okay, this might be, I didn't want to pick on something in particular that was done in a translation just because it feels bad to me, like I'm picking on the translator or something. But something I wanted to bring up was a recent translation that came out that I didn't actually hear a lot about the quality of the overall translation. I heard more about the way that a particular character was translated. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, off of that, I'm talking about the Chrono Clock translation. Did you guys see the way that they translated the one character Didi's lines?
I heard people talking about it, but I also had zero interest in anything Chrono Clock related. So,
I mean, it's not something that I'm personally probably going to read because I just have the backlog is insane. It's just ridiculous. But what they did is Didi is one of these characters who uses a whole lot of gratuitous English in Japanese. And what they did instead is on some of those lines, in the translation, she uses some gratuitous Japanese that a lot of people probably wouldn't pick up on if they're not kind of already engrossed in the culture of Japanese media, which you kind of pick up if you're a big anime or VN reader. But if you're somebody who's like, oh, what's this chrono clock thing? I'll look at this. You'd have no idea what watashi means. And that's something that probably almost everyone who reads VNs or watches anime knows what that means. But you might not know that if you're just getting into it. And it was one of these things where it's like, I appreciated the intent of trying to maintain how frustrating it is to listen to this character talk. But at the same time, it's not the same because there's not a whole lot of people who are English speakers who go around using a whole bunch of random Japanese words. But there are a lot of English loanwords that have slipped their way into Japanese. So it's like, I understood the intent of them wanting to do it, but I thought the execution was kind of poor, which actually made me think when I was seeing that of something that was done in Root Double's translation that was actually, I thought, a really good solution to that problem. There was a line that in one of the roots, one of the characters says completely in English, I believe, and it was translated as Spanish instead, which more English readers would understand than most, as opposed to if it was in Japanese.
Oh, yes, I remember that one.
Yeah.
I mean, I was the one who did that, so I'd be pretty brain dead if I forgot.
Yeah, exactly. That was one of the reasons I actually wanted to bring it up, because you're the guy.
I mean, I think you're completely correct, actually, on that. I think, again, it's one of those things of intent versus literal translation, which is that the intent is, this is your native language, and there's a language that a lot of people, use, for example, the loanwords for that, and so people will pick up on it even if it's not their native language, which is what you're getting with the Root Double thing. Or if you go into pick Spanish as a second language, that's going to be, I think, a hit a lot closer to home than picking Japanese. I know they did something similar in Persona 3, not a visual novel, but something similar where the character uses English, and they use French for her instead of Japanese in that case.
Right. The particular intent I have that Root Double example was, I wanted to, convey the whole use of a foreign language thing, because while I know a lot of people are amused by English, I don't appreciate like a straight up translation of it when it can be helped.
I think it makes way more sense to do it that way.
Because it's like, okay, fine, it's amusing for a bit, but are you really trying to convey what the original was trying to do? So I just figured Spanish was a widely used language, and I figured that would work since it was only one line anyway. So I figured it would be okay for that case.
I think it makes total sense. Actually, kind of getting into that, I had another interesting series I wanted to mention, which was the Sakurai works, because it's kind of getting into those intent versus literal translation things. And the thing about Sakurai is that her prose is it's not very typical for what you'd get in a lot of VNs. It's kind of like a little more literary. There's lots of repetition, lots of flowery language, which makes the actual translation difficult, because if you just translate it, you're going to get a bunch of gibberish, and you kind of have to actually be a decent writer to then mimic the style rather than just like copying the words there. And so, for example, I think it was Koz TL worked on the Gakthun translation, but I thought that that was actually like an excellent example of doing a good job of getting that same feeling that exists in the intent of what the author is doing with these very repeated segments and things, while still being very readable in English and having that sort of literary aesthetic. And I think I said that that intent and getting the style and the intentions across is far more important than actually just getting the literal meaning of the words.
Yeah, no, I had to face almost the exact same thing on DSUA recently. It's the same kind of case. Trying to convey the literary style was just as important as conveying the actual nuance. But
yeah,
of course,
people have said it's untranslatable for a long time, so...
The people have said that Yeah, they were lying. I mean,
I'm
it's
glad to hear
completely
that.
possible. Sorry, let
Since you're
me
doing it.
clarify.
Yeah.
It was completely possible, but it was fucking hard. It took a lot longer than usual translations go, because rather than just translating the sentence straight up, you have to think over, how do I convey the style in English while also keeping all the information from the Japanese,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. And it takes more time usually to think over like just what words will work best and that stuff here, because just up and flat conveying the Japanese words is direct translation, and obviously you don't want to do that.
Kind of bleeding into another topic that I had wanted to mention, which was about good bad translators rather than translation, and not to like now sit down and just go down to like a list and shit on translators, but I mean what I'm curious about
I'd rather not do that.
is like qualities you think are actually necessary for being a good translator, because from what you're saying here, and this is something that I've kind of posited for a while as well, is that you need to actually be good at writing in English to be good at translating, and be actually able to write competent prose, I feel like, to get that good style-based translation across. Do you have experience writing, John? Do you feel like that's like a necessary thing, or do you feel like it's helpful in the scene?
Funny story about that. You see, back when I was in middle to high school, I actually wrote a lot of I wrote some fan fiction. So that gave me some experience of writing. Now the bad side is they were all shit. So I can't say it was perfect.
Well, I was gonna say, what's the bad side that you were actually writing fan fiction? Like,
yeah, no, don't worry. I already deleted all them in shame.
of course, yeah, it's
No
gone.
evidence.
It's yeah.
It did give me some practice writing though, yeah. So it helped out, but I'll get into it a little later. But the problem was I didn't connect that at first when I actually started out translating. When I first started out translating, I was completely inexperienced with it. So when I was starting out, my thought process was, how do I convey every single Japanese word back into English?
Ooh, yeah.
Yes, that was a terrible mindset, but unfortunately one that I didn't realize the dangers of at the time. So initially, I did not connect my writing. I hesitate to call them skills, but my writing practice with actual translation. Instead, it was just basically trying to copy almost word for word the original Japanese in English. Because when you're starting out translating, your thought is, I need to convey all this Japanese information to English, word for word, not rewriting the sentences into actual natural English. So at first, I didn't really use it. Every subsequent translation I've actually done, I feel like it's been a step closer to actually doing that whole process. Like when I started with Never 7, I just did that whole Japanese English straight translation, and to this day, I really regret that. So I tried to improve my next time in IO. With IO, I think I did a better job, but I still suffered from having two literal translations, which I feel could have been rewritten to more natural English to flow better. So again, I didn't really connect my training back then either. It wasn't really until around my Killer Queen translation that I actually started trying to apply that sort of thought process. The whole trying to write as if they were actual natural English sentences. So as much as sorry, I feel like I'm getting off topic.
No, this is good. This is all very good. This is exactly what I was curious
so anyway,
about.
Yeah, around time of Killer Queen, after I started writing more natural, I got better. I started thinking back on how I used to write and started applying that to the actual translations, and as a result, I felt it started flowing a lot better. But maybe not actually publish anything, but I feel like translators should at least have some experience practicing writing some novels to be a good translator.
Yeah, I mean, it
have some.
Makes a ton of sense.
Another important thing is while we may be really exposed to Japanese culture, it is always important to keep reading like natural English sources, like read English novels all the time. Read anything normal in English all the time, so you don't forget how to write actual normal English sentences.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you'll just keep writing translation. I'm sorry. Otherwise, you'll just try write I hesitate to say like more like bad fan sub style.
Mm-hmm.
Because Japanese writing just uses a lot of different kind of words and expressions from the natural English, so it's easy to mess that up if you're not experienced. So long story short, yes, I do feel writing experience is important. I guess I could say the most I've ever gotten out of my actual writing experiences with writing crappy fan fiction and actually translating is actually most of my stories were like fantasy based, so I had a bunch of fight scenes in them and all that. I managed to connect that to translating battle scenes in DSE array. That was the most I got out of it.
Hey, it's surprising. I mean, as a sort of aside from visual novels and kind of like life things, it's surprising the kind of things that you can find valuable experience in, like writing fan fiction.
Oh yeah, I would totally agree with that.
But yeah, no, it's that's cool.
And while I don't publish fan fiction anymore, I still do occasionally write stories from time to time in private, but I don't actually publish them just to keep up with that kind of stuff. So I feel it's important to keep practicing even when you're busy as a translator.
Yeah, I think that's good because like we've been saying this whole time. I mean, kind of what makes the translation feel good is if it reads like English, and if you're not good at writing anything in English, you might end up being on the literal liberal scale that people talk about a lot with translation.
Oh yes,
you might end up too far on that literal scale where people start to get a little queasy about how Japanese your English sounds.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, however, going too far on the liberal scale is also just as bad.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
What's it called? My personal opinion on translations is you can write the English sentence as flowingly. Sorry, you can write the English sentence as flowingly as you want, so long as you do two things. One, you convey the nuance of the original, and number two, you do not ruin characterization for anyone.
Mm-hmm.
If you go too liberal and like just try to make it too natural, or like don't respect the author's original intentions at all, it's very easy to screw up both nuance and characterization, which is what you should absolutely avoid no matter what.
As a fan of the medium who consumes the translations that are produced, I absolutely agree with that sentiment because I mean I there's a degree of trust that we the English readers who don't read in Japanese have of like to the translators to be delivering to us
exactly
what the author's original intent was. And the thing is,
an important part of sorry, continue.
Oh, I say the thing is that some readers might not be able to pick up on whether or not the translator has actually done a good job or not. So there really is a degree of trust there we have to give to our translators.
That can also tie into what's it called. There's also translations who are not too liberal, but they can be a little, how do I put it, like obnoxious and show-offy. Like they know so many like what's called fancy. They know so many fancy words and try to show it off in the translation or something.
Mm-hmm.
It's like no, don't do that. That's just you're just like showing off. Then that's not what we're supposed to be doing at all. It's like it doesn't matter how many.
Your goal is understandable English, right? It should be
right, exactly.
Something that people can read and just easily sit down and deal with.
You're not supposed to sound like a 19th century Victorian novel.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not just like in translation. A lot of like starting writers get into that trap too, writing overly fancy because in their mind that equates like good writing. But no, it's just not. At least in my opinion. But yeah, that's something you also have to look out for. Of course, I'm not saying obviously that having a wide vocabulary is bad. Far from it. The wider your vocabulary, the better, because I think
there's a very clear difference between having a wide vocabulary and using it, and then just writing like you're sitting next to a thesaurus, pulling out these obscure words.
Right. You should avoid thesaurus writing. Of course, like you should use words that convey the information in the best way possible. But just don't like don't just throw in some old, now like defunct 19th century word for the heck of it, that kind of thing.
Okay, so John, you mentioned you have experience doing fan fiction and sort of practicing the writing craft. Do you think that that is a common opinion held in the translation scene, that you need to really get to that level of having the good English writing? Do other people there have experience writing professionally or as a hobby? Just sort of curious about what the overall like composition of the translation scene is like.
Honestly, of all the translators I've come across, I haven't actually heard many stories about translators who write like stories in their spare time. Maybe they like write articles or something for news sites or reviews or stuff like that. But I've never actually heard like writing stories. Of course, I'm sure they're out there, but as far as I know,
oh yeah, the secret fan fiction of the translation.
Well, yes, obviously, most of us don't want to bring up our crappy fanfic past. So
it's okay, I don't either.
So yeah, I'm sure that they are, but they'd rather not be known for it.
Okay, I mean, I think it's a good thing.
Even if like the extent of what you write are articles and things like that, that's still practice crafting English sentences.
Yeah, no, you're right about
it's still
that.
Absolutely valuable.
Yes, it's a great way to still practice your writing. It's like you're not exactly writing story sentences,
Exactly.
So when you're translating for a story, it might not come as natural.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of moving on from there then, out of a bit of curiosity as well, do you have like advice for someone who would want to get into translation for kinds of things to practice or to think about or to keep in mind? Be that either for fan translation projects or for like looking for a job at an official kind of gig?
Well, first of all, obviously, you need to actually know Japanese. You can't just have studied for like a year or two and think, yep, I'm ready to do this. No. You need years of experience first before you actually consider it. One. Two, like I said earlier, you need to have you need to actually keep up on reading actual English works so that you remember how to actually write proper English sentences. Then also, like I said, I feel, well, maybe not be necessary to a lot. I feel like having some writing experience should be helpful because it's my belief, at least, that the way you should be translating is to try to write sentences like you would if you were writing a natural English book or something like that. So having some writing experience can help with that, and also like never let up on actually reading Japanese even after you've studied Japanese long enough, because if you slack off too long, your translating and reading abilities will slip.
Yeah, that's something I can speak on, at least as far as making sure you continue to read Japanese, because I'll admit I've been kind of bad about reading Japanese the past couple weeks, and I have not read much at all. But I did start trying to process some Japanese the other day, and it was kind of a struggle as somebody who's still really learning the language and doesn't use it at all outside of reading. Because I took, a week plus off, I kind of had to get back into the groove a little bit. And that's kind of how it works for most things. If you take some time away from it, you start to lose some of your edge on it. And that's definitely true for a language that you literally only use to consume this media.
Another big tip I have, which is I think any translator should strive for, is you need to actually try to get into the author's head and mindset when they were writing. Like, don't just assume things off the top of your head. Try to imagine you're the writer and try to figure out every single nuance and meaning to everything they've wrote rather than just simply charging straight ahead. Because if you go off your assumptions too much, then they can really muddle up the meaning of the original.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I think that kind of ties back to a little bit of what I was trying to get at earlier, which is just that it's not about just, or what you were mentioning as well, it's not just about translating word for word, it's about actually like understanding and creating an experience that other people can understand, which requires, I think, a much higher mastery than just plowing through it. Like, you can sit down and kind of get the gist of what a sentence says just fine, but conveying that to someone else in a way that makes sense and sounds good is a much more daunting task.
Sometimes it might be impossible due to like whatever reasons, maybe scheduling or just or maybe like it isn't even completed yet if you're a translator for currently being made visual novel. But if you can, if possible, you should have read the whole thing before you actually even start translating, because you need to actually be able to catch up on all the foreshadowing and other elements that the author places ahead of time. When I started out translating Never Seven, for instance, it wasn't major because it wasn't a big deal there, but I hadn't actually finished reading it when I first started out translating it. So when I did finish reading it, I had to go back and fix a few lines that had some foreshadowing that I didn't catch up upon initially and stuff like that. So it's important to always make sure that you're actually familiar with the source material. Otherwise, some earlier lines might be complete gibberish to you, and you'll translate them completely wrong, which will ruin foreshadowing later on.
And that's something that I think several English readers who have read this prior to the official release coming out is the people who read Umineko. That was being translated by the Witch Hunt while it was coming out instead of after everything was completed. So,
which was why, honestly, when it was being translated at the time, I was kind of nervous about that. I was like, this is a giant mystery novel, right? Shouldn't you have the full story ahead before you actually try and translate this? I get it's popular at the time, but I feel like obviously I haven't read Umineko in years, so I forgot how well they translated. I mean, no offense to the translation team whatsoever. I just when it comes to mystery novels like that haven't been finished yet, sometimes I worry when you start translating when you don't even have all the pieces to fully guess the writer's intent, if that makes any sense.
Well, yeah.
No offense to anyone at Witch Hunt.
Yeah.
They worked really fucking hard on it.
No joke. Yeah.
Really, really felt like it really engrossed me with the way they translated it. Just that sometimes when I was translating, I wonder, will this come back to bite them in the ass if some later episode comes around and reveals that, we interpreted this line wrong or something.
Yeah,
like
and
that.
that's something where you're seeing now. Like we've got the new official translation. One of chapters 1 to 4 is out, but 5 to 8 is still not out, because even though there's this existing fan translation, now that it's all out and they know everything that happens in the story, they actually do really have to go back and clean up a lot of the lines, because there's context that they have now that they didn't have before.
Right, exactly. That's what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Context is vital to actually translating.
Exactly.
Without context, you really shouldn't be translating it at all. Well, obviously, like I said, there may be circumstances which force your hand, but if possible, you should definitely have read the source material beforehand.
Yeah, it's funny too, because they have a blog post kind of acknowledging that as well, that they put out right before the Steam release. So it's we know that, as they point out, that Ryugashu said there's a treasure chest hidden throughout the series for people paying attention. we kind of smashed some of those. Hopefully the retranslation fixes that.
Yeah, again, like I said, they couldn't have known at the time which hunt I mean, but that's just something people need to always be careful about when translating an ongoing series. Or at the very least, if it's now we have official translations nowadays, I feel that should hopefully allow for more translator to author communication. Like they can actually ask the author their questions and stuff. Like there were a few times on Root Double where we were able to talk with Takumi Nakazawa about some of the things we were a bit less sure about, and that helped immensely. And even in Diaseri, there was one case where there were some lines that were very hard to figure out for any native English speaker. Heck, even Japanese speakers might have problems with it. So we had to talk to the original author to help clear them up, but that helped immensely. So yeah, in the future, I hope that if there are more ongoing series translated, that translators and authors can maintain more of a steady communication for this kind of stuff.
I think that's a big advantage that we're starting to see now, as the authors in Japan are realizing that there's a decent-sized Western audience for visual novels, that we're able to bring it over to English with the author's assistance, instead of just a fan project that might not be able to. Like you say, being able to talk to the author when you're trying to convert what the author originally wrote into English is a massive benefit.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I think that's one factor people should take in, when there's that whole debate of official translations versus fan translations. Because the thing with fan translations, since you don't have the privilege of talking with the original author, it's more up to the translator or the translator team's interpretation versus if you need that actual like word of God opinion, you can have that option. But I know there's some people who would just much rather stick to fan translations, and to be honest, I'm not really sure of the reasoning. Besides, maybe that's just what they're used to, and maybe there's just some other factors of official translations they don't like. But
Well, more than anything, just more stems from the fact that the visual novel fan base was based on fan translations. It's not like any other genre. It's not like RPGs. They couldn't just rely on like some official company that was producing them out normally. I mean, Jazz USA and other companies were out back then, but even then, they only released like what, a few a year, maybe sometimes one a year if you got lucky. And as a result, they really didn't have much to go on. So when the fan translation scene grew hot in the late 2000s, that was like that just what attracted the main current fan base. So I feel they're still in the middle of a transition period right now, so to speak.
Yeah. I think the kind of what I've perceived. I mean, I'm actually relatively new to the VNC, and I've only really got into it a couple of years ago. But what I'm kind of my perception of it is that kind of the current atmosphere we have as far as things coming to the West is really because the fan TL scene was so big several years ago.
Exactly.
Like, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the fan translations.
And another issue that causes like why people are still like so reluctant to embrace official translations, I feel, is also the atmosphere. So back in the day, when there was just fan translations, just fans translating for other fans, they could have very open discussions, very friendly atmosphere. Well, and obviously when those fans weren't just translating for glory, but actually wanted to share their experiences with others. And overall, it was just like felt like there was this whole giant thing that we were all a part of. That we we were bringing this completely obscure genre into English together, and it felt like a real group effort, so to speak. Now we have official. Sorry, what were you gonna say?
I was going to say, back then with all that, there was kind of more of a camaraderie between the consumers and the translators.
Yeah, exactly. It was like these visual novels are never going to be made in English, so we might as well band together to help make that happen. Nowadays, when you have official translations coming out, one issue is that Japanese business practices are extremely different from Western English business practices, and Japanese companies are still trying to adjust to that, and there's still a bit awkward in that regard. So that's why I wouldn't say they haven't quite figured it out, but they're not quite in sync with the Western atmosphere yet, which leads to more rejection from the Western audiences, I feel. Like, what works for fans in Japan will not necessarily work for Western fans, so to speak. I personally feel that nowadays fan translation for VNs will, at least at this point in time, look like they're heading more the route of RPG fan translations, I think. Like, official translations will become the norm, but like there will always be fans out there who try to translate VNs that either will never get an official release or aren't looking likely for one. Or even like in our cases, maybe a really old VN that has like virtually no chance being picked up.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like nowadays we're just going to a period where the fan translation scene is dying off, and I know this might get a little controversy, but I think it's for the best that way. I mean, fan translations were really more a reaction to the period of the time. VNs were an obscure genre. They weren't really looking like they were going to get any official releases, save a few from one or two companies that only threw out a few a year, and sometimes not even very interesting ones at that. And so the fan translation scene was just so vibrant because they didn't really have any other choice if they wanted to get more visual novels out there. But now with more and more companies that release visual novels, and with the Japanese side becoming more active in wanting to release them into English markets, I just feel like, I wouldn't say like fan translation's place is like dead, but it's no longer like the necessary bridge it used to be anymore.
Yeah. Fan translations used to exist because there was no other way.
Precisely.
For a lot of these projects. And now we have multiple localization companies popping up. Like I've seen a couple that are just like, hey, we're some people who would love to translate some visual novels, and there's people out there who want to do this. So there's less of a necessity to have fan translators now.
I think especially too, we've
Yeah,
had
exactly.
some of those announcements where we had the big names and the will never be translated, can't be translated, the Baldur Sky, DACRI, and Subaheavy, and guess what? All of those got picked up. So I'm hoping that fan translation doesn't die off entirely. I think there's still a place for it. I think.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying it'll die entirely.
But I think there's always going to be some holdouts. Maybe this is me being pessimistic. We're never going to get that fucking MiHoYo translation, or really any of the Type Moon stuff translated officially anytime soon. It seems like they're.
Well, that's their decision. So.
Yeah, exactly. It's a Japanese holdout, it's a Japanese company holdout kind of thing, and so.
Well,
I think it's on some levels unfortunate that basically the fan translators are the martyrs of the community, where they put in a ton of time only for themselves, basically to work themselves out of a role. But at the same time, I really do think having easy access where you can support the creators is definitely the way to go going forwards. And I'm much more interested in having that than trying to download and patch all of this stuff and get like 10 files to work together to make it happen.
But at the same time, what's it called? Having a fan translation history can still help you. Like, part of the reason, I think a big reason why we were hired for Regrettably is because we were already translating multiple of Takumi Nakazawa's previous works. So we already had sort of, I don't want to say street cred, but we already had a bit of a reputation for having translated works for them. So maybe with us, it's a safer bet for people who already know their games that they could put. More trust, put some level of trust in us at least. Try it out. So I feel like it can at least help you as a starting point nowadays.
Yeah, well, because that's all of the people that we look at now who are I think all of, I don't know for sure. You'd know better than I do. All of the people who we look at now who are the people who are translating all these big works are people who were once fan translators.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's absolutely a starting point if anyone's looking to get into it, get into translating, to still be fan translating stuff. Because like we said, there's tons of stuff out there that's never going to get an official.
Please finish MiHoYo, someone. I'm begging you.
Just finish learning Japanese, Ralina. It'll be fine. You'll get there.
It's just like an RPG. Just like the evil will never die as long as evil exists in the hearts of man. So too will translations never die as long as untranslated visual novels exist in the VN business.
Oh my god.
Yeah, I mean, as long as there's always going to be series that people are passionate about, like we've already said, it won't get officially translated. So, as long as there's people willing to fan translate, there could always be that chance for Walt. It might not get an official translation right away. Just raising awareness through a random translation release, out of nowhere, might raise interest to a larger degree, depending on how good it is. You never know.
I guess it'll be more helpful for people who want to translate more, diverse visual novels. I mean, a big reason that official releases are becoming more and more common nowadays, aside from the rise of localization companies, is because, well, quite frankly, currently the visual novel industry in Japan is in a really huge slump at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
An oversaturation of high school eroge and stuff like that. They just don't sell the way they used to, and so visual novel makers in Japan need to look to Western markets in hopes of actually getting more and more sales, because it's slowly stagnating and declining in Japan.
Put college year VNs already.
That's the thing. I think there's like you were talking about earlier, the business practices in Japan versus them in the West are quite different. But if the developers over there can really learn to resonate with the way that the Western audience wants to purchase and consume media, I think that there's a real possibility for them to find a solution to their sort of slump right now in a Western audience, as long as they do it right. Because there's a lot of people who want to read visual novels in the West. There really are. They
just need to adjust the waters first, really. Yeah. Also, well, I guess this isn't the place for it too, but also like what's called you need to like find a good point of like what Westerners are interested in terms of visual novels.
Right.
I'm sure you're probably covering some other section, but so with more original English visual novels being released nowadays and more new fans coming out, figure out what exactly they want and what they consider a quality visual novel is becoming more and more blurry these days. So,
well, it's on an unrelated topic. Like I've spoken talking about English VNs. I've spoken with some of the people who are working on these things, and they're very confused sometimes about what the audience wants. So that's kind of an awkward thing, is to try to figure out what does the audience actually want.
Well, visual novel fans are all like very rooted in anime manga fans. So right now they're the majority of the audience, but whether or not that changes in the coming years or not, so we'll have to see, I suppose.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Because you have trouble like selling what's called more traditional visual novels to like wide varieties of Western audiences, because either like the look doesn't match what they want, or it doesn't have gameplay for them, or whatever, for a variety of reasons, really.
Oh yeah, there's a ton of contributing factors.
Sorry, we're getting a bit off topic here. Sorry.
Oh no, it's okay. It's there's a ton of contributing factors that influence that. So yeah. Yeah. So speaking of being on topic, Relina, you had one more thing you wanted to slip in here before we moved on.
I don't know if it was worth mentioning. I had a note about Sharon no Kuni, because I remember reading a thread a while back and people being like, people who've read the current fan translation of Sharon no Kuni shouldn't claim they've actually read Sharon no Kuni. They've read a story that is based on and similar to, but is not Sharon no Kuni. I'm like...
Well, I mean, even both the new Avenger and Mugi have disowned it, basically, their translation.
Yeah, people have said things about the same thing about, I think, what is it, Cross Channel. People have said that about the English translation for that too. That oh yeah, if you read the translation for that, you haven't really read Cross Channel.
When you're starting out as a translator, like I was alluding back to earlier, you're still trying to figure out basically how to actually translate a visual novel, so to speak. Like I feel like a lot of fan translators are like that. When you start out as a translator, you're still getting the ropes and everything. You're still trying to figure out how to actually translate, unless you've had like formal training or something like that. But a lot of these fan translators cases they didn't. So for a while you're just there trying to just figure out how to actually translate the visual novel and the whole convey the nuance and right senses in natural English sort of way. But in your first couple of works, that doesn't exactly pan out most of the time. So you have a lot of awkward first translations like that most of us, at least in my experience, would gladly go back and change. For example, my Never Seven translation, well, I wouldn't actually say I disowned it. I'm still disappointed with it when I look back on it now, and if I ever had the chance to redo the whole thing from scratch, I would gladly do it.
All right, thank you, John, for that great insight. Well, let's go right into news. We have some pretty big news for this month. We got a double dose of Grisaya. We have the all ages version of Grisaya no Rakuen, or the Eden of Grisaya, but also the first 2 volumes of Grisaya Phantom Triggers. So pretty big month for Grisaya fans. Have any of you guys tried these out yet?
Not at all.
Nope. I've fallen so far behind on Grisaya. I feel bad about it because I really like the original, but
yeah, I mean, we talked about it before. Like I had a good experience with the original one, but at this point, I'm just kind of over Grisaya. Which sounds horrible to anybody who's a fan of the series, but I just got other stuff I'm more interested in right now. I'm happy for all those people who've been waiting all this time, because I know that it's been fun for them. So it's great that it's out, but it's not that big of a deal to me.
Personally, I haven't actually played any of the Grisaya games myself because I decided I should just wait till the whole trilogy was out so I could binge it. Generally, that's what I do with trilogies. I wait for the full thing to come out first so I can just do it all at once.
Mm-hmm. Smart man. I kind of wish I had done that.
Yeah. I'd probably be more interested in doing it if I had just waited the whole time.
I have been waiting for Rakuen just so that in the event that I get that urge to read Grisaya, which I'm sure I will at some point, I can sit down and binge the whole thing.
Yeah.
Like, aha, I waited. Smart.
I mean, I guess I could have played the Grisaya trilogy in Japanese and all that, but there are Japanese titles I wanted to play first, so I figured I'd just wait for it to come out in English and then binge that.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, I'll admit I went a different route of impatience, and I watched the anime versions of Makyu and Rakuen, which apparently are actually decent adaptations as opposed to
I
the
heard
original
they
one.
were better than the Kajitsu
Well,
adaptation, which
I mean, they got.
yeah, I won't voice my opinions on that right now.
Yeah, I mean, we'll leave that. But basically, I kind of want to know what happens in the main story. So I might read Rakuen maybe when the 18+ version comes out. I know there's like a whole bunch of people like who post in the release stuff like, well, I guess I gotta wait another 3 to 6 months for the 18+ version. So there's always those people. But as for Phantom Trigger, I mean, I'm kind of interested in it. I'm probably not gonna read it right away, but so I heard some pretty decent things about it. Like reception doesn't seem too bad, so I might check it out sometime. But anyway, off Josiah, the next bit of news we have is Little Busters just got recently put on Steam Greenlight, and just so you guys know, this is actually the Little Busters Perfect Edition. So it's naturally not 18+, but it has like all other content besides that, like all the ecstasy routes. It's an HD port. You have the option of switching between English and Japanese language, and there's a lot of really cool features, and there's a lot of hype around it. So I hope all Little Busters fans who really like the original fan translation can support it. It's a really good story.
It sounds like the new English edition, even though they're calling it English edition, is really going to kind of be sort of the new definitive edition of Little Busters, because it's going to be dual language. It's really going to be like the new quote unquote best version of it, from what I understand. I mean, don't quote me on that down the line if it's not, but
I won't quote you on that down the line.
I know you will.
We have a soundbite of it now. It's forever preserved.
Yeah, it's anyway.
But yeah, that's an exciting release. Hopefully, I'm sure maybe it'll hopefully come out in like the next month or two, or I don't know how these Greenlight things work.
Oh, it's probably going to be longer than that, but
yeah, but it's cool.
It's moving along. It's news, and that's good.
Yeah, good, better than no news. It's exciting, very exciting news. But another really exciting piece of news is that actually at the end of this month, May 31st, Dies Irae is scheduling to be released. We've got the localization director himself here, and I'm sure John is just as excited as the readers to finally see that release date.
Yeah, I'm really excited too. I mean, Dies is probably the hardest project I've ever worked on, and definitely the one I put the most effort into. So overall, at the end of the day, I'm very pleased with the work me and the rest of the team put together. But we all worked really hard on this, and we hope that the final product will live up to everyone's expectations. Dies Irae has been a very long awaited work in the English visual novel community. So to be able to be a part of the effort that is bringing it over to Western Shores has made me very excited to see how people will react to it. And I hope that those listening to it will check it out, and maybe you'll find it enjoyable.
Yeah, I think DS is going to be one of those that I break the rule that I've been trying to get towards of trying to read in the original language that things were written in. I'm pretty sure I'm going to end up reading the translation of Dies Irae, so I'm very much looking forward to that when it comes out.
Oh yeah,
I wouldn't worry about it. Even the Japanese had trouble reading Dies Irae in the original Japanese.
Good, then I won't feel bad about that decision.
In any case, I'm pretty sure once Dies Irae is released, depending on like how people like it and the amount of praise it got, even before from like the Japanese only readers, like I'm sure this could be like the next super all-time great visual novel that like a lot of people on many forums like highly recommend if you like want like a really cool story, action based as far as I know visual novel. So hopefully that goes really well. It sounds like it'd be really fun. That wraps up what we have for news. So now I'd like to pass it over to Nakaneshi for the Shill segment.
All right, thank you, Ange. As you might remember from the last episode, from here on out, we're opening the Shill segment up to listeners who would like to have a place to sit down and talk about one of their favorite VNs for a couple minutes. And so with that in mind, I have with me here Zonijo from the R Visual Novels community to talk about one of his favorites.
Salutations, ladies and gentlemen of the podcast. My name is Zonijo, and I'm here today to shill to you my personal favourite visual novel, Princess Evangel. So what's it all about? Well, Princess Evangel is told from the perspective of Okanogi Messiah, a down-on-his-luck young man who, through an interesting set of events, ends up attending the rather prestigious all-girls boarding school known as Vincennes. Brought in as a male sample, Messiah must convince the sheltered ladies of Vincennes to accept the idea of reforming into a co-ed school. But when I say these ladies are sheltered, I'm talking girls who have rarely, if ever, interacted with a guy outside of their own father. So, with 99% of the students wary or outright afraid of him, and the traditionalists throwing obstacles in his path, will Messiah even be able to get the girls to accept him, let alone the idea of reform? And with that obligatory boring plot summary out of the way, it's time for me to gush about the aspects of Princess Evangel that really shine. P fits into many genres. It's a romance, a school life comedy, and even gets a bit dramatic at times, but at its core it's a moeg, and you know what that means. Cute girls and lots of them. The main draw of P is its lovely cast of characters. Every heroine and side heroine are charming and likeable in their own way, and even the minor characters have some great moments. While their personalities range from adorably naive to mischievous and cheeky, all the girls share a common trait, and that's that they're a whole lot of fun to watch. Especially my personal favourite girl, Ruriko, who, while not having her own route in the main game, totally steals the show in the common route. Seriously, every scene that girl's in is pure gold, but I digress. I honestly think there's something for everyone in Princess Evangel, and by the end you'll grow to like them all and find yourself wanting more. The stories, while not particularly deep or thought-provoking, are well written and satisfying. They do what they need to do, and that being just letting you spend more time with the fun characters. And the overall presentation of the VN is top-notch as well. The art is very nice to look at, with eye-catching CGs and a good amount of cute sprites for each girl. The general background music is very upbeat and cheerful, and if you're anything like me, you'll find yourself whistling a few of the tunes even when you're not reading. But the overall music is very good at fitting the mood when it needs to. My two favourite pieces being Best Main Girl Ritsuko's theme, which is a very soft, almost lullaby-like tune, and the goofy music that plays whenever something particularly silly happens. Basically, Princess Evangel is the kind of VN I could recommend to anyone just looking for a fun, light-hearted read. And with the fan disc of Double Happiness just on the horizon, there's no better time than now to give it a try. I have a lot of good memories with it, and I'm sure that if you give it a chance, you will too. If I've piqued your interest, you can grab the all-ages version from Steam, or if you're a man of culture such as myself, you can grab the 18-plus version from the Manga Gamer store. Either version is well worth your time and money, trust me on this.
All right, thank you, Zonijo. And if you listeners are interested in being on this Shill segment in the future, all you have to do is reach out to us either on our Twitter at VN Broadcast Club, or you can reach out to me at Nakanashi with an underscore at the end, or just on my Reddit account on Reddit if you are a Redditor and not a Twitterer, and we can look at getting you set up.
All right, that's about it for this episode's content. Be sure to tune in for next episode's content. We'll be talking about various different visual novel genres, like, such as like romance, sci-fi, mystery, action, etc. Like, it'll be a really fun but broad topic. I just want to give a thank you to John Hooper for coming on to talk about his experience as being part of a translation team. We really enjoyed getting your insight and discussing various translation stuff with you.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for having me on. I mean, I've had a lot of fun with this. This is my first ever podcast, and like that. And it was a very fun experience for me to be able to just sit down and talk about my thoughts and experiences with visual novel translation over the years. Visual novels have brought a lot of people together, and to be a part of the effort that actually does help people to get to read works they normally would not be able to in English is a very rewarding experience, and I look forward to bringing you more stuff over the years, and I hope you've enjoyed what I've done before. Thank you very much for your time.
It was great having you on, John. Also, thank you to all our listeners for continuing to support us for these last 4 episodes. Hopefully you can continue for all episodes to come. As always, I've been Ange Time.
I'm Ralana Tricolor.
And I've been Nakanashi.
See you all in the next episode.